Hey everybody, welcome to This Is Not Therapy Hour. Brandon will be joining us momentarily as I hear him running in the door. Sorry for starting a little late today. As always, we're was up to new and exciting fun things that get us easily distracted. But today's stream is going to be about how to make decisions. Um,
No.
hey,
The clock on our microwave in the waiting room is about 2 minutes slow, I guess. Or yeah. Anyway.
these said microwaves would change our life, and all they've done is cause us to be late. Don't trust microwaves, people.
Did you already do our intro? Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I'm Brandon Tessers. I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy. With me today, as always, is Cecil. Cecil, say hello.
Hello.
I know you already did. I don't know. I just say that. Who is in yet another different office in our office suite as we're like shuffling things around and expanding and bringing new people into offices. But yeah, what this hour is just a chance for whoever's here in the chat watching live to interact, ask questions, talk about whatever we want to talk about collectively. Every week we choose a theme just to make it easier to get started and not put pressure on people to have to jump in right away. This week I don't know what our theme is. What's our theme?
Making decisions.
Making decisions is our theme this week. That's my tea timer. Our theme this week is making decisions. So we'll start by and you can see obviously how much prep time I put in every week to talking about the topic. But for those of you who are here, we'll go wherever the conversation goes. It doesn't have to all be about making decisions every time. So, did I get it all?
Yeah.
Be aware that this is public, I guess, so any comment you put out there is like could be seen, and we record these things and put them on video on demand on YouTube, right?
Yeah. So that way people can like see them and review them, ask questions they may not have time, and use them as a resource if they want or whatever. So, yeah.
Even though I usually only get on the call or on the stream like 30 seconds before we launch, somehow getting on 30 seconds after we go live is like way more unsettling. It's not like I have a big routine or something, but I'm like trying to like get settled in here. Yeah, okay. We'll get going. Making decisions, right?
Yeah.
I'm waiting for you to put it up on the screen. Usually you put it up on the screen. I didn't know.
It is. It must just be technical issues on your part.
This is funny because I did not like weigh in. Sarah and Cecil, Sarah especially, are so good about choosing topics based on like what things have been coming up and work with clients, because we do tend to notice that there are patterns in things that if one person starts to struggle with something, a lot of people might. So it's great. And in this case, it's also nice because I have been working on developing some like worksheets for people to be able to work through a decision-making process. So I have a lot of thoughts, a lot of things to say about this right now. But we can start with like when we were talking about planning a couple of weeks ago, right? Last week was sequencing. So planning was a couple of weeks ago, I think.
Yeah.
First and foremost, always when we're talking about executive function, we're talking about cognitive processes, not external observable behaviors. So really when we're talking about making decisions, it's a lot like what we were talking about with planning back a couple of weeks ago, is that originally what we're talking about is just there's a thing in your awareness, something that you are noticing. Again, a problem, which for us is just defined as anything of which you are aware that is different than the way you would want it to be, or that you think will happen differently than you want it to happen. Doesn't mean bad things, doesn't mean significant things. It just means anything. My tea is a little hotter than I want it to be. Problem. Solution, let it sit for a little while. Like, not a big deal. So making decisions in that cognitive sense is really the same thing as making plans. I know that was kind of, I don't know if it was super clear when we were talking about making plans, that setting intention piece of just arriving at this is what I'm going to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And what the goal is, just like with planning, with setting intentions, is address your resources are being spent on in the moment, not to perfectly control the future, not to make the perfect decision, but to just be able to resolve whatever it is that you're paying attention to so that you can stop paying attention to it and free those resources up for another thing. So basic overview, but let's get practical, because usually when we're talking about making decisions, what we're really saying is there's a thing that I need to make a decision about but haven't been able to yet. Usually that's the context in which it comes up. If we have other specific questions that go in different directions, we'll go wherever. But starting there, the most common question I get is in this category is, when do I know it's time to go? Like, I want to think about, okay, what are all the variables? What are all the factors? How is this going to play out? What should I do? What's going to be beneficial? What's going to be harmful, etc. But then at a certain point, you have to do something theoretically, if it's something that you do actually have to make a decision about. Like, I know I want to go to college. What college do I want to go to? And again, that's a big one. It's going to happen one way or the other, right? Time moves forward, whether you are doing, well, I was going to say whether you're doing something or not, but you're always doing something. It's an arbitrary distinction when we say, oh, I've been doing something or doing nothing. But when to go on that decision. And so this is like the first framework. This is the first worksheet I was building last week. The idea to beat. We talked about it 2 weeks ago, I think. Is that right, Cecil? Do you remember?
We talked about, like, I think the last 3 weeks, but I think we brought it up then. You asked for that.
Yeah. So the idea to beat, meaning, first off, if I had to do something right now, under whatever hypothetical situation you need to make it in order to say, I have to choose in the next 5 seconds, what would I do? Because two things we can say are definitely true whenever you're trying to make a decision. Number one, you already have at least one idea, or it wouldn't be in your awareness at all. And number two, you don't like that idea, otherwise already decided it and be resolved, right? But you got to put out what you have so that you can respond to it. And then second from there is, like we talked about before, question number one, do I believe that there's information out there that if I had it would enable me to make a better or different decision? Or the other question, is there something I can do other than the decision that I've got, other than my idea to beat? Is there something else I can do that I believe will bring me more information that would enable me to make a different or better decision? If the answer to both of those is no, that's when it's time to go, even though your idea is bad, because going forward will give you more information. Otherwise, we stay forever. Makes sense? I feel like I'm repeating a lot of what we talked about in plans.
I mean, yes and no, just because, like, they're all kind of similarly linked, but like the thinking about it in this way is still, like, helpful.
Yeah, usually people will use plans to talk about something that involves more steps or is longer term, whereas decisions is usually talking about like something that's not, it's like a one-time thing. But other than that variable, they really are the same thing. It's, I'm aware of a thing, I'm thinking about what to do about it. I got to make a decision, make a plan. So I think, first of all, for anybody who's here, including you, Cecil, if we have any questions to get more specific, my volume is a little low.
Yeah. I'll just say something, but I don't want to interrupt. Sarah let us know. Thank you, Sarah. I tried to, like, increase yours to max volume, but
yeah, it's got the wrong mic selected. Sorry. There we go.
Okay. Nope, that was my fault. Yay, see? In a way, everyone gets to fail together.
Yeah, I don't know. I should have checked to make sure I had the right mic selected. Because I can go on, like, the bigger, like, more detailed. There we go. Sarah threw a question in there. How do you choose a wedding venue ASAP when you're super busy and have no energy or money? We were just talking about wedding venues. And it's a good specific question. Oh, hi, Sarah. Sarah's been
Hi.
hear, but just typing, and now we'll be able to hear her voice.
I figure we'll kick it off with this one since we've been talking about it all day.
Yeah, since all our minds are there. I don't want to get too much into any details other than anything that you have details for the question, Sarah.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't really care. Basically, the situation I'm in is that I just got engaged, and wedding venues are booking up like crazy for all the places we want in the next year and a half. And we have to decide on a place and, put the deposit on a place ASAP. But my fiance has no time through the week to even see places. And I have no time to put the energy in. So trying to decide what we want before before we go, have a list of places that we're gonna put our resources into going to check out is just really stressful. And it feels like something that it feels like a big decision, right? It feels like something that I'm going to look back on and hope that I made a good decision, And so it just feels, I feel a lot of pressure, and I feel like I'm just spending so much of my time thinking about
it. This really is a great specific one. I just didn't want to announce that you just got engaged if it wasn't public knowledge or anything.
Oh, no. Yeah. Please. We love attention. Yeah.
Yeah, congratulations, Joe and Sarah. So this is a really good one. Actually, it's a lot like that college example that I used before, because everything you're saying is obviously true. How would we know any different? But also common and reasonable. In other words, one thing that can make decisions, making a decision easier is knowing that you can change later, right? But in this case, this is one of those cases where, yeah, theoretically, technically, you can obviously always change it, but there's going to be penalties for that, presumably. You put down a deposit that you might lose, and other
it's
places
are 50% deposit for most places.
Right. So that puts pressure on you to say, okay, I got to make sure that it's the right decision, that I'm not going to regret this later, right? Mm-hmm. And that's impossible. You can never 100% predict the future. So I'm going to give I hope my intent today anyway is to give a lot of practical exercise type advice, some smaller, some bigger. So here's one to start with is, even though it's arbitrary, as all scales and numbers and everything we do is, all language is, set a threshold for how certain do I need to be that a place is the right place in order to be able to pull the trigger. Because it's not going to be 100%. Do I need to feel like it's 99%? Do I need to feel like it's 85%? And that number can change. And again, it's arbitrary. What does it really mean? But it locks in for you that not only is 100% certainty not possible, that it's not even what you're going for. You know what I mean? Rather than an intellectual understanding of sure, I'll never be sure, but really we're still kind of waiting for that bolt from the blue to be yes, this is the perfect one, which might happen, be great, but it might not. And so if you pick something like that, this one, you probably want a pretty high certainty of yeah, I'm 95% certain that I am not going to regret this later.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
So how do you get to that 95%? What is it that Sarah needs to do to be oh, this is the percent that I need?
Well, in this case, I would talk to Joe about it, but we can start with, because it's the two of you together and whatever other stakeholders are involved in any decision, but we can ignore that for now. And that's why I keep saying over and over that it's arbitrary. All you're really saying is that you're putting a number on how important is it to me? How much of my resources is it worth to make as certain as possible, right? Because some decisions, it's yeah, I don't know. I want better than 50-50 odds, but it's not that big a deal, And some decisions, it's going to be. Go ahead.
One thing we've done is make a list of some non-negotiables.
Great.
In terms, and so Joe and I have spent some time getting on the same page with the vibe we're looking for, and then like there's a few like non-negotiables where we're like, okay, we're not going to go to, like, if we see that this venue does this, that's a no. Like we're
Right.
weeding that one out. So that feels like working towards this like percentage, right? I don't know.
It's a yes, that's part of what you can do. So like, let's say that you say you want 95% certainty, right? Then you can do what you're doing and more of it, or others, all things that we'll talk about, as a kind of way to arrive at, once you have 95% set, then you can kind of back up and say, okay, what do we need in order to feel like it's 95%, right? And this percentage thing is one of those that's real quick. Use it or don't. If it doesn't matter. It's really, like I said, just two things: to be aware and explicit about the fact that there's no 100% certainty, and then to give yourself and whoever else is involved in the decision with you some information to work with on, like, how many of my resources or your resources do I want to be put into achieving, the right outcome here, finding the right decision. Does that make sense? Like if you and Joe each did this and you were like, no, we need like 99%. And he's like, nah, like 60%. Then that's something that you need to talk about up front of, that's great that you don't care as much about it, but I do. And this is what we got to do about it, or however you'd handle it. But to have some clarity on, like, so that it's not people being dragged along and being like, because honestly, with wedding planning, that happens a lot. And like stereotypically with in heterosexual relationships, that with the woman being more invested in the man being less. And of course that's a stereotype, but it does, happen. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as everybody's on board and like explicit about that. About like, of course I care very much that this goes well. Whether I care so much about this flower or that flower, I don't have as strong of an opinion, kind of a thing.
Yeah. Joe is going to pick the flowers. Truthfully, like I don't want to have to go through all that, but then then I give him the decorating job.
Well, I mean, this is great. This goes back to however long ago we were talking about cleaning, where the whole point is, in something big and complicated, you divide it up by, here's what you care about and here's what I care about more. So let's just split it up, rather than, Joe, you have to drag me along to every flower shop and I have to drag you along to every whatever thing is my responsibility,
Right.
So I don't want to get hung up forever on the percentage thing. It's really just a way to say, like, I want to have a way to define when it's time for me to pull the trigger, but the definitive way to do that is still that idea to go back to that and say, is there more information I can get, or is there something else I can do to get more information? Now, in this case, that's going to be tricky, because there's always going to be another venue you could go look at. So you're not going to end up by saying no to both of those questions, like you might on other decisions or on other plans, and just go and figure it out later. And again, like college and like a lot of things, there are always more you could do. So the decision-making process is going to be different. And that's why I'm throwing in this other exercise of percentage, which is really just a way to say to each other when the time comes, like, yep, I'm certain enough. In a kind of more easy to communicate kind of way.
Yeah.
But let's move past that and then on to what you're already doing, which is the next step that I would suggest. Remember that everything is about choices within constraints. And so by doing what you're doing with the non-negotiables, you're setting more constraints, which limits your possible choices, which is good. At least in this case, it's good, because there are way, way too many options to actually investigate them all. So the other thing that I'll talk about with decision making is, I used to be an ACT and like SAT tutor. That's how I put myself through college and stuff. So it's really easy to become an ACT tutor if you have good ACT scores. People are like, yeah, sure. But the thing that I would teach people all the time, I don't even remember where I got it from, but predict, then eliminate. because the brain is not set up well to compare more than two options against each other, or to compare two options against each other that have more than two vectors, I guess, under which to compare it. Meaning like, okay, this phone is got a better camera, but this phone is cheaper, but this phone is on this network, but this phone is, like as soon as you get past comparing apples to oranges or comparing apples to apples, then the brain starts to shut down. We see this all the time. Everybody has the experience where you're with a bunch of friends or family or whomever, and you're like, okay, we're going to go to eat where we want to go to eat. And like 90% of the people will be like, I don't care, I'm just hungry. Until somebody says, okay, let's go to blank. And then half the people said they didn't care. All of a sudden, like, no, not that place though. Right? Because when it's like, where do you want to eat? All the options, the brain does not handle that well. When it's, do you want to eat at this place? Yes or no. Brain's really good at that.
So like in this situation, like how do you deal with like comparing apples to oranges? Like how do you eliminate that?
That's where predict and eliminate. Predict first is what's the ideal, right? What do I want? Cecil, you and I were talking earlier. We're doing job interviews right now. Hey, if anybody's a therapist in Illinois and wants a job, hiring. Or if you know a therapist in Illinois. Where I'll ask the question all the time, okay, imagine that everything goes exactly the way you want it to go. Imagine you have access to all the resources and support that you need, and all the things that are outside of your control break the way that you would want them to break. Then what do you want? What's your ideal? Because we don't ask that question very often. We usually start with the constraints, the parameters, the elimination part, which we'll get to in a second. But it's really, really helpful. Or another way to put it, Cecil and I have been talking about this a lot lately, the whole we got to burn it to the ground kind of philosophy in certain circles, that when talking about how to improve an institution or a system or whatever, that a certain segment of those communities will say there's no improvement to be done. Any improvement is just pacification. We have to burn it to the ground, which is an incredibly helpful way to think. Because it is this, what it's saying is, imagine that what currently exists did not exist, and we were building something hypothetically from the ground up exactly the way we wanted it to. That's such a great framework to use. It doesn't actually usually mean, let's actually go physically burn this to the ground, because then the next step is, okay, that's the ideal. Now let's deal with reality and where are we and how do we close that gap? Like K-12 education, absolutely. 100%. Yeah. I got asked that specific question on our podcast a couple months ago about like, so what are you saying? Would you burn it to the ground? And I said, yes, but that's not a real thing. Like it's so nice. Honestly, it's a very privileged position to sit on the outside and say, yeah, let's burn it to the ground, because you're not there involved in the day-to-day being like, no, there are millions of students all over this country that are going to be going into school tomorrow. We can't burn it to the ground. But how do we make it better anyway? That's what prediction means here. Predict and eliminate. Prediction is positive goal setting. And I'm sure that you've done some of this, Sarah, or tell me, I guess, if you haven't, but imagine that the perfect venue existed and it was available on the date you wanted for the rate you wanted. What does that look like? Have you done some of that with you and Joe?
Yeah. I'm actually, well, I don't know if you know this, but I'm an executive functioning coach. And so I know, because I actually am helpful, and I do some of this with Joe, because what happens is that I find that he gets very, like we look at a venue, or we like imagine a venue, and he attaches the price to it and suddenly gets really stressed out because it's like, oh my gosh, okay, so that's going to cost so much money and we'd have to give up this and this and this. And I'm able to be like, okay, great. So imagine that we have all the money in the world. It doesn't matter. Like money isn't even a factor here, which it is, but we're not going to get there yet, right? What does it look like? What are those things we want? So kind of the same thing that you're talking about, where it's like we kind of explore that and then like talk about things in terms of reality and how we get like as close as we can to that.
Yeah, I love that and your response, and also a little part of me is like, haha, welcome to my world, where like you cannot interact with anybody under any circumstances without also seeing the like executive functioning side or cognitive side of things. And people love it until they don't. And then they're like, shut up.
I always preface it with, is it okay if I go into coaching mode for like 2 minutes? Stop. I'll just say this one thing.
Yeah, well, as a little bit of a side like note here, the way that I like to talk about responsibility, and maybe we've done this on stream before, is if I am aware of a thing that is different than I want it to be, and I believe that either A, there's something that I could theoretically do that made it more the way I wanted it to be, or B, that something I'm doing or might do makes it further from what I want it to be. That's it. That's responsibility. Nobody else has to put it on me. If I'm aware that somebody is suffering, if Joe is struggling and I love Joe and he's and I'm aware that there's something I might be able to do to help, to then like say, no, but I'm not going to do that thing is hard. And of course, the things that you can do to help sometimes would not be helpful, obviously. So you read the context and whatever. But the more you become aware of things, or Sarah, maybe you have this experience, because I feel like most people who did like actual acting training, I shouldn't say it that way, not actual. I mean like, college acting training, I guess is what I mean.
Like conservatory.
Yeah, where you're spending the majority of your resources on acting training for years at a time. At least this happened for me and for most of the people I've talked to, where there's a stage kind of early on where movies and plays are just ruined for you because you can't watch them without analyzing the acting performance. You can't just like sink into them anymore like you were before. And everybody like freaks out at that stage. They're like, oh man, like I can't even enjoy these things. And then you learn more and grow and develop to the next step where it's like, yeah, I can analyze it and see what's going on and also let go of all that at the same time, But anyway, the more you're aware of a thing.
I imagine that with music too. Like I'm not super attuned to music and I can just kind of let it like flow over me. Whereas like if someone was like, oh, that drum part there, I'm like, I didn't notice the drums. I just noticed the feeling the drums gave me. But if I were more attuned to that kind of things, I may notice more of that.
Well, and I like this because right back to decision making, although we're skipping a bit, when you say that you want it to have a certain vibe, and again, I'm assuming you've already done this, or at least some version of it. What does that mean? Because there definitely is like that feel, right? I'll know when I see it. Mm-hmm. And that works great, but if it doesn't, then you're stuck with, okay, how do I get as close as possible? And that's when you got to start breaking things down a little bit more. Like the job interview, right? Like I want to walk into an interview and be like, oh my gosh, this person is the perfect fit. No question, we're good to go. But that's probably not going to happen. Or like this happens in romantic relationships all the time. What's that?
So not with me there.
Yeah, you ruin everything. No, this happens with like romantic relationships or love all the time, where some people expect it to be this like your people who interview well sometimes are the worst fit. Yeah, sometimes.
Yep. Talk about that because I have strong opinions on it. But yeah,
when where people will be like, no, this isn't love. Love is like hit you over the head, and maybe it is. I mean, everybody has different experiences, but also sometimes it's like. There's a line in an old Bright Eyes song that I love where he says, I'd rather be working for a paycheck than waiting to win the lottery, which I think is applicable here. Like it's fine to wait and say like, yeah, I want something to smack me over the head. But if it's not happening, I still want to be able to do something and not just wait around forever,
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah. So that's the point of prediction. It's the like, imagine there's some money. And like you said, Sarah, of course we do have to deal with money. But for the first step, imagine that you can have whatever you want, because then it gives you a target to aim at. And then you're just trying to get as close as you can to that, given the other constraints that you have, like money or, location or availability on the dates that you like or whatever. So you start with a prediction, meaning what is it that you want under ideal circumstances? If that exists and you can find that, and it, you know, if you have enough reason to believe that it's possible, that it's worth putting resources in, awesome. The second you find it, you just grab it and you don't worry about anything else. If it doesn't, then you switch to elimination, which is, okay, of what we're seeing, yes or no? Because part of what's stressing you out, Sarah, is, and again, I know you know this, but if you were to look at a list of 20 venues and try to compare and choose the best of 20, that's like an impossibly overwhelming task. Whereas when you go see a place, if you can say yes or no, or if you have non-negotiables that just make it easy to be like, nope, 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 and eliminate things to get your options down and allow you then to spend the same amount of resources you were spending anyway, but investigating fewer possibilities so you can get to each of those more deeply. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So anyway, long way of saying, yeah, non-negotiables is great. And of course, in reality, they're not actually non-negotiables, because if you didn't find anything that fit what you were looking for, you'd negotiate on one or
Right.
more of those. But you think, you know, it's reasonable to assume that you will, you know.
Yeah.
So I wanted to put that out there.
Right. I know. I'm gonna
Follow
go
me.
grab some lunch actually, real quick.
All right.
But thank you for letting me pop on and helping me with this thing that is weighing on me.
Yeah, we'll keep going with this example unless somebody else gives us something, just because it's here. If that's all
Yeah.
right with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Take it and run with it.
Cool.
I'll get back from lunch and watch it.
Yeah, I wanted to. Bye, Sarah. Thanks for joining us. I wanted to pull that out because we talk a lot about positive goals and negative goals, and I worry that sometimes people think I'm saying that you know, what are the things we're trying to avoid. So I wanted to just make it clear, like, why actually negative goals can be great and helpful, especially in complicated decisions.
Okay.
Hopefully that came across. I feel like I haven't heard from you much, Cecil. I don't know if I'm just rambling a lot today or.
No, it's good. I mean, like, I'm gonna ask questions when I have them, but until then.
Another like little saying, I guess, Mark Rosewater, who I don't know if he is anymore, but was the lead designer for Magic the Gathering for a long, long time. His mantra was always, yeah, Mark Rosewater, of course, you know, the guy who wrote for one episode of Roseanne back in the early 90s. Okay, I know a lot about the lead designer of Magic. I used to read his blog. Anyway, his mantra is restrictions breed creativity, which I love because it's true. The more constraints you put on me, the more creative I have to be in order to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And especially for neurodivergent people and especially for ADHD people, we find this pattern all the time where once a crisis hits, I'm great. Like every client with ADHD I've ever had has said some version of like, give me lots of time and space to operate. And it's like, I can't do anything. I can't figure out what's this, what's that. But as soon as you make it urgent, I'm like snap into action and like tell everybody what needs to be done. And everyone relies on me. And sometimes people like it, sometimes they don't. Of course, this is just another version of I put it off, put it off, put it off, put it off. But then when it's due tomorrow, all of a sudden I can write it all at once overnight and still get a good grade or whatever. So part of that is, okay, I'm almost positive I talked about the Robert Frost poem that I love, the like two roses converged in a yellow wood. Okay. So here's a modification on that. That the premise of the poem is that he's looking down a branch in the path and he can't see far enough down either way to be able to make any determination about which one is more interesting or which one is better. They look about the same. He has no data to go off to make a decision, and eventually he just has to decide and go. And yes, that does impact the rest of your life, but you just have to do it anyway. Here's the modification. Some people have better vision in this metaphor and can see further down the path. And so are used to being able to work through decisions further and further and further and further and further. And a good kind of like test about whether you're a person that sees further, whatever, because it's not binary, is Do you envision conversations, especially difficult conversations that you think might happen before they happen? Do you think what you might say and how the other person might respond and how you would respond to the response and how they would respond to the response to the response and so on? The more that you're doing that and the further you'll go into like, okay, I'm like 10 minutes into this hypothetical conversation. That's what we're talking about when I say they're used to, people like this are used to, I'm one of them. We're used to looking farther down the path. Well, if I can look farther down the path, usually that means that I'm not going to go until I can tell which one is better. Give me more time. Let me explore these paths more. You know, like as long as I have time and it's not urgent, I will keep looking and thinking and trying to figure out which path is better. But if you put like a bear chasing me behind me, then all of a sudden I'm just going to go down a path. Doesn't really matter. You know, like maybe on some intuitive level, I'm picking one over the other for a reason, but I'm just going to go. And that's a lot of what this experience is like about making decisions. You know, a lot of what we tapped into when we're talking about making plans is until I know what's better, I'm not going to go, you know. So give me space, I'll wait forever. So again, restrictions, giving yourself a deadline, right? Making other people give you a deadline is even better. You will make a decision by the end of it, even if you're not comfortable with it. In Sarah's case, sooner or later, they're going to feel enough pressure that no matter what they've seen or not seen, they'll pick something. Or they'll push off the wedding date or, you know, whatever, right? And we don't want to be in that situation. Cecil, you're thinking something.
I was thinking that, like, how this works in this whole idea of cost and value and how like that affects it. It's like, because like, yeah, if we have indefinite time, then like we're just gonna, I mean, go on forever. It's like that. We talked about this before. It's like, you know, like your masterpiece, you know, will take forever if it takes forever. You know, if there's no like end date or finish point. So like, how does that work? In, like, good. Oh, how does that work into like the idea of like if it's arbitrary and you're like, oh cool, I want to be at this point, like how do you determine that like that's working for you then? You know, does that make sense?
What's the
thinking about things before going? So like we're looking down the paths and we see all these different branching paths and we have to make a decision. Like we obviously don't want a bear chasing us because that's not fun, and like but that gets us to the end of it. So maybe we don't want the pressure of this like looming deadline. What is a way to like prevent that then, instead of like having to work where we're stressing ourselves out? Like all
right, so we're going to do that thing that I do sometimes where we talk about all possible options, not which ones are good or bad. You know, we'll do that after, but just all the possible options. And of course, this is a hypothetical like metaphor, so it's easy to control. But yes, either I will wait for something urgent, and if it's not a bear, sooner or later, I'm going to get hungry enough or bored enough or need to use the bathroom enough that I'm just going to go down one path, right? So that's one possibility, is waiting until something becomes urgent, because sooner or later, it probably will. Now, some decisions, that's not true. You could wait forever and it will never be urgent, i.e., should I share my novel with somebody? Should I let someone read this novel I've been working on? You can wait your entire life and it might not become urgent. Now, it might, for other reasons that are not as easily distinguishable as like becoming hungry or whatever. That's just an internal sense. Cecil, you and I are both people who tend to, you know, we say, give us indefinite time and I'll never make a decision. It's not actually true. We do have our limits. Our limits are just way longer down the path than most other people's, but there have definitely been times when you and I are talking for hours at a time where you reach your limit first and you're like, okay, let's just do something now. And there have been other times where I reach my limit first and say, no, we got to do something, right? So that's one. You just wait and wait and wait until some unknowable variable makes the decision for you by saying it's urgent, just pick one and go. The other is to become like comfortable with the fact that you're not going to know, that you will not hit 100%, and do that exercise we talked about earlier about saying, how important is it to me? You know, in that case, in the metaphor of which path do I go down? I don't know. If I have anything over 50% at all, I'll just take that path because who cares, you know? So that tree looks cooler than that tree. Cool. I'll go walk by that tree and see what happens if that's what you've got. But you have to be comfortable with being less than 100% certain. Another possibility is waiting or asking, you can do this actively, getting somebody else to tell you which one you should go down is the simplest version of that. And the most complicated version of that is showing you every single thing that you will experience along the path. And not really possible. But getting information from other people, which again is very common for ND people who like to use their intellect to engage with non-real data, future pattern prediction, blah, blah, blah. Partly because if in this metaphor, we do often see further down the path, right? That other people will say, yeah, these don't look different to me at all. And we'll say, no, don't you see that difference? And then they'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. And because we've had that experience, a lot of times we assume that there are other people that can see further down the path that we can. So we're waiting for them to tell us, the number of clients I've had who come in and say, like, I just need a therapist that's smarter than me, which is, obviously we've talked a lot about intelligence. You know how I feel about that. But really what it means is like, I need somebody who can see farther down the path and tell me what to do, which is not how we do things here.
or to see the paths that we weren't seeing. I mean, that's why I'm like, oh, well, I think these are the options, but I obviously know that I'm limited. There's probably like 9 options and I'm only seeing 3 of them. And so.
Yeah. And that, in the metaphor, I like that too. Whole nother metaphor about doors, and a similar kind of a thing. Seeing more paths than other people see causes its own problems in its own way. And that's pretty much it. Either that or you just never make a decision ever and you just stay and starve to death on that path. Either something becomes urgent and you just pick one and go. You become comfortable with lower certainty. You listen to somebody else who tells you what to do, or you don't do anything at all. Which one is best? Well, that's up to each individual person in each individual context. Generally, starving to death on the trail of the metaphor is probably not the best one, but sometimes it is. Sometimes it's like, oh, I want a new phone. Let me do a lot of research about these different kinds of phones and which one I would like. And eventually I'm just like, you know what? Never mind. This is too much. I don't need a new phone. I'm good. That's all right. So there's not like a should or shouldn't do. It's just an acknowledgement of the reality that you cannot control for the future. A lot of what we're talking about really is people acting as though they have more control over the future than they actually do. Trying to make perfect plans and perfect decisions and knowing exactly how to go about things. How do I know that I'm studying correctly so that I'll get an A? How do I know that this venue is going to help me to have the exact wedding that I want to have? And of course, you could be hit by a meteor in the next 5 seconds, which is ridiculous, but it could happen. You can't control it. So I won't say, a lot of times I'll say like, you can, even if you're doing it 99.99 repeating, but I've had 3 different like STEM focused clients be like 99.9 repeating is 1. I'm like, okay, fine. 99.98 repeating then. It's part of the reason that like, especially ADHD people will end up in patterns of life where everything they do is urgent all the time. It feels like everything is always urgent, in part because I don't address a thing until it's urgent, because unless it's urgent, I want more time to think about how to do it. Partly because I lose track of things and they pop back up on me. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, crap. Yeah, that is urgent because I totally forgot it. And partly because we operate better under those conditions sometimes, that when we feel as though things are urgent, we do step up. We do become that person that everybody else is like, oh, okay, you took charge. Normally you're like, go with the flow, do whatever. But I'm this way when I go camping. I don't know if you remember that, Cecil, like when we've gone to like Goblin Valley.
Yeah.
Like I'll always remember one time my brother like disappeared when we were on a camping trip. Goblin Valley State Park in Utah. If you like camping,
Cool.
Highly recommend. And as soon as that happens, I'm like field marshal mode. I'm like, okay, you do this, you do this. Let me check over here. I'm going to, like dissecting the areas and how we could split them, whether it's actually effective or not, I don't know, but I'm definitely in that mode. My brother wanders off a lot.
In those times too, like, I mean, this is like the bear chasing or whatever else. Is it like you know, there's that sense of urgency, but also like that urgency like somehow brings about a sense of like clarity or perspective. And maybe I'm seeing that wrong. This is like, cool, I can pull the trigger now and like do it now because like, you know, like that's what I hate because like, you know, there's the idea like, okay, cool, there's a sense of urgency, or there's also like, you don't ever have to do it. But then like, if you never do it, then there's that looming sense of regret, and each passing moment builds more and more until it's just like this overbearing weight that's like crushing you that you might as well like have given up from day one and never do anything ever again or attempt to.
I have seen people refer to something they call the Jeff Bezos regret minimization framework, which is just like a, I don't know, fancy name to put on a quote that Jeff Bezos said one time of, yeah, I know. But, you know, for some people, when someone has that kind of success, you know, by certain definitions, they're like, ooh, I want to emulate that. Anyway, what you're talking about.
Hitler had success. If you want to emulate him.
All right. I'm just saying and even when people do things that we like or don't like, that doesn't mean there's nothing to be gleaned from them, you know.
Good point.
Anyway. I'm not endorsing anyone. I'm just saying
that biased out there.
I try to give credit when I didn't make something up so that, you know, it's clear what I've gotten from someone else. But anyway, apparently he said something like, when I'm not sure about whether or not I should do a thing, I ask myself 40 years from now, what are the chances that I regret not having done this thing? And if my answer is, you know, whatever kind of answer, then I just do it, even though I know there's risk or whatever. And whatever else you can say about billionaires, and there's a lot, you definitely can say that they have some confidence to like move forward and believe that whatever they think is right is right. Now, maybe that's not always great, but it's true to some extent anyway.
Yeah.
But that, so I wasn't bringing that up as like a great example of how to approach this. I was bringing that up as that's kind of the problem. If you look at it as a question of, will I regret not doing this thing? You know, like there's going to be a lot of things that the answer to that is yes. All that's really saying is change from will I regret doing this thing to will I regret not doing this thing, meaning focus on the potential positive outcomes more than on the potential negative outcomes. And that I'm on board with, but be realistic. There are risks. Risk aware is good. You can't always control all the variables. Yeah, Aatrox, exactly. You've got to be aware of the risks. Now, being aware of the risks is just as limited as anything else. We're talking again in the metaphor about how far down the path can you see? Will I break my ankle? We don't know. You might not. Is it more likely this way than that way? Again, even if that's true, that theoretically it's more likely, that's a statistical thing, right? Like if 100 people went down this path and 2 broke their ankles, and 100 went down this path and 1 broke their ankle, still 98 people didn't break their ankle on this. So more or less likely is a conceptual framework, not a what will happen. Okay. And again, when you're good at looking down the path, you have a tendency to be like, no, I must examine and determine every level of risk. So it's not a coincidence, for example, that academia, which is full of highly intelligent people, and remember, for us, intelligence is not about capacity, but about dealing with abstract data, dealing with meaning, you know, things that don't actually exist in the environment, but that allow us to design frameworks and plans and, you know, understand things and do things differently. That it also happens to be a place where people are pretty risk averse, where we have very, very like structured, you got to go through these 17 billion steps of this plan, you know, before you're able to move forward on a thing, you know, risk minimization kind of stuff. And again, other places, people will be like, nah, I'm just going. And obviously for every like successful person in a case where they're ignoring the risk and going forward, there's a bunch of people that succumb to the risk. But of course we don't focus on those ones as much.
Because we focus on the positive.
Well, we focus on narrative, and narrative is about which things. It's the man bites dog, you know. What if it's a dog bites a man? That's not news, but a man bites dog is news. It's something unusual, something that breaks the pattern. The more commonly we're aware of some individual narrative, the more likely it is that narrative breaks common
Yeah.
patterns of experience. There's a reason that we love like fantasy and sci-fi and action movies and how many of us are walking around getting in gunfights all the time, but how many people go watch movies about gunfights all the time,
Yeah.
That's a whole nother, we can talk about that another time.
So how do we make a decision?
All right, so here, I'll talk through these worksheets that I'm working on building. So
Cool.
Cost versus value, and break those things down. And what are the variables that, what, I can even pull it out. No, it'll take me too long. Never mind. I'll do both at the same time.
Decision. No, it's the word
Stall
of the
for
day.
time.
Stalling for time. Now I'm on the spot. I feel like I can't do anything. But just so we know, I don't know. I was going to say something witty, and then my mind's gone blank on this one. So, I don't want to stall for time.
Yeah,
Or immoral. Put it that way. It's stalling for time. Hitler's a monster, just so we're clear on that. I feel like I said that he's successful in his terms, obviously not in terms of anybody else or any real terms, because what he's doing is
Are you
detrimental.
talking about Hitler?
Yeah, I'm stalling for time here and qualifying because I feel like what I said could be very terrible. Hitler was by no means good at all in any way, detrimental to not just people, but also the existence and future of humanity as a whole.
Okay. Here's the best I've been able to come up with for how to break it down thus far. And I'm going to keep working and like refining this, but here's the best I've been able to break it down thus far. Because we start with those things which are irreducible. And that's kind of abstract, but that there are three things, call it metacognitive, whatever, experiences, observations of ourself that are irreducible. We can't break them down further. It's affect, cognition, and volition, meaning what do I feel, what do I think, and what do I want? We can do analysis to say, why do I feel what do I feel, or why do I want what I want, or whatever, but we can't break down what is the experience of feeling the thing that you're feeling. What is the experience of wanting or liking the thing that you like? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we start with that because that's where it's irreducible. Do I want this thing or not? That's the simplest version. Do I want this thing? Yes or no. So in Sarah's example, every time she goes to a venue, it's as simple as, do I want this venue? Yes or no. Now, there are other things that then complicate it because she doesn't have the time and the resources to go look at every single venue. So she has to come up with other ways to be able to break that out. Because simple is great if it works. If it doesn't, we get more complex. So do I want this thing? Yes or no? After that, if you need more than that, then the next step is, what is the value of this thing? Because if the answer is no, by the way, we're done. We don't need to go any further than that, right? Like, no, I don't want this thing. Cool. I don't need to examine it further than that. If I do want this thing, but I want this thing, and I'm trying to balance how much I want to spend and how much I want to play, So then we say, what is the value? Value we break down as impact and import. Impact being an observable description of what I believe will be the difference if I do the thing or don't do the thing. If I book this venue versus some other random venue, what would be the actual difference? This place is here, it has this. Some other place, I can't compare it to every other place, but if I don't have it, I won't have this thing, this cool fountain in here that I think is awesome, right? And then import is subjective, where it's how much do I care about that? So Cecil and I could look at a decision and agree on the impact that, okay, if I do, I don't know, X, I'll get $10. We might both agree on that impact. Yes, you do X, you get $10. Cool. How much I care about $10 and how much you care about $10 is going to be different for a variety of reasons that we can't predict. And I'd probably be pretty close, honestly, in this specific example, but it's different. And, we can make it more exaggerated. How much does my 5-year-old care about $10 versus how much do I care about $10? There's a bigger difference, right? So that's value. You break it down that way. And then what is the cost? And you can break that down. I don't know if we've done a VOD about the accomplishment equation, but cost mean what resources will I have to spend in order to make this thing happen? So in the venue, some amount of time and energy and going to the place and seeing it and whatever, but mostly money is what you're looking at. and you put together those resources, and we can break it down, but we don't have time to do it right then. Then you say, is the cost greater than or equal to the value, which is purely subjective because they're not actual numbers you can compare against each other, but it just allows you to look at the relationship. Okay, it costs this, yes, but it's worth this. Which one do I care about more, right?
Yeah.
Now, the next step of that is this is where it gets really complicated, right? Okay, so say, yes, I do like it. Say I did put it together, the cost and the value, and determined that the value is worth the cost, but I'm still not ready to pull the trigger. If that's the case, it's because I'm aware that there might be other better options, even though this option does work for me. I want to look if there are better ones. And things can be better in a few different ways. One is that it has the same value, but a lower cost. So even though this one does work, can I find something else that I love just as much that costs less money? That's one question. The other question is, it costs the same amount of resources, but it has a greater value. Can I find another place that costs me the exact same, but is even more of what I would want?
Sure.
And then even more complicated are nearby options where the value is a little less, but so is the cost, or the value is a little more, but so is the cost. And so how much up and down am I willing to go? So those three questions. And then we're talking about opportunity cost, which is, what else would I do with those resources? When you get stuck on that, when you get stuck on, okay, this venue is great, costs $5,000. I don't even know what venues cost. This venue is great and I love it. Costs $5,000. I think that's worth it, but I might be able to find some other place that I like just as much for less money. Okay, well, how much? You're making guesses anyway. You're guessing that you can find another place that you like. So make another guess about how much lower of a cost, Are you going to find a place for free? No, that's easy to say, or maybe not. I don't know. So then, you find a place at which you're like, I bet I could find someone I like just as much for $1,000, or, whatever version. I could find a place I like a little less for less money, blah, blah, blah. The opportunity cost question is, what do you do with that $1,000 you save? Because you're going to take more of your time and more of your energy to find this new place, theoretically. It may or may not work out, with the hopes of saving $1,000. Well, $1,000, money in particular, but time, energy, all of them are so vague because they're involved in so many things that it's like, sure, it's always better to save money. Yeah. It's better to save time. Yeah. Because you can spend it on a bunch of different things. But get specific. Because in this particular example, you're trading money for time and energy. And how much is that worth it to you? Right? So what else do you spend it on? We recently had a treehouse built in our backyard, and it cost more money than I thought a treehouse would cost because I didn't do research on how much treehouse cost. So when we got the quote, I was like, whoa, because it costs more than I thought it would. So it seems expensive or surprising to me. And then I look into it, I was like, no, that's actually a pretty good price for a treehouse. Then the next question, when you don't have resources, the next question is, can I afford it, right? Like, do I want it? Yes or no? If yes, can I afford it? Yes or no? If yes, I'm gonna get it. That's my experience of when I had fewer resources, because it very much was something's gonna come along and take my money anyway. Might as well spend it on this thing right now while I have some. But then when you do, that's a version of moving from urgent thing to urgent thing, right? Just in money terms. When you have more resources and even some excess resources, then the question switches to, is it worth it? And part of, is it worth it? Cost and value, right? But then, okay, what else would we do with that money if we didn't spend it on the treehouse? We know why we want the treehouse, or we wouldn't be thinking about it, especially with the pandemic. We're at home more, and we wanted the kids to have more things to be able to do that change things up and, whatever. So there's clear stuff there. We could get more clear about how many hours do we think we'll use it and whatever, but we didn't feel we needed to. The other question then was, what would we do with this money if we didn't spend it on this? And it would just probably go into our retirement accounts, which is good, but what are we really talking about? Like 30, 40 years from now, we can go on an extra trip that we wouldn't otherwise go on when we're retired or whatever, So that helps clarify. And then you come back, once you've explored those other options, what else could you spend the resources on? Are there other ways to get it for fewer resources or greater value? Are there nearby options? It just gives you more and more clarity of, okay, yeah, this one didn't hit me over the head as it's 100% perfect, I love it. It hit me as I like it, it works, the cost and the value balance, but I'm not sold enough to stop looking. So let me keep looking, and this is how you look until you reach a point where you say, yep, I'm done looking. I don't think it's going to happen anything better than that. Or, you know, we use this same process when we're picking names for our children, or the baby's born and it's like, whoa, got to go, you know, urgent decision, bear's coming down the path, like, got to go with what we think is best, even if we're not totally sold. It's time.
Cool.
Now that I'm saying all that, I don't think any decision ever really gets made without any sense of urgency. It's more just the balance of the more certain I feel like I need to be, the more urgent it needs to become before I'm going to lock it in. Whereas if I'm not, like, if I don't care as much about the certainty, then it needs to be not nearly as urgent before I'm like, yeah, let's go.
So just the takeaway for the day is everyone should get a bear to chase them. Just putting that out there. So
I
it's
mean,
the best solution. So
it sounds terrifying, but also exciting. So I don't know. Give it a shot. Don't actually give it a shot. I love, like, I'll make a joke like that, and then this little voice in my head, this little voice in my head is like, liability, you know, like, which is such a ridiculous thing. Obviously, it's not real, but I have that voice in my head. It's like, what if somebody did it and then was like, well, Brandon told me to do it. It's like, never mind. It was a joke.
Yeah, I mean, also for the health and safety of the bears, don't do that because they're. We'll get to that later, but yes, a Care Bear. Also, okay, we were over time. Not that we didn't start on time, but yeah. We're Effective Artistry. We're here every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. Catch us next week. If you have any questions, you don't hesitate to ask. You can engage. Start with the comments. Sorry. Don't hesitate to engage. Send us an email and stuff, or join us live and chat and let us know what you think and ask questions. Everything else. If you have any questions, you know, contact us. You can find us at Twitter and Instagram at EF_artistry or effectiveartistry.com. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, a great week, and see you guys next week.
Thank you, guys.